Well, I think we're good to go. Let's get started. Um, if anyone else joins, obviously, they'll have access to the recording afterwards. Um, Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Who's in the room already? I really appreciate everyone coming along, and we're spending time today to talk about Sustainability 101, helping you all build a bit more of a foundational understanding of sustainability. I'll talk more about why we've decided to focus on this anyway to begin with here in the UK chapter of the SPP. For those of you who do not know the organization, and let me just spend a couple of moments giving you some background. The Sustainable Procurement Pledge was started in 2019 by Thomas Udesen and Bertrand Conqueré, CPOs of Bayer and Henkel, respectively. And they believed that procurement could play a massive role in terms of making organizations more sustainable by impacting in a positive way how they operate their supply chains. And so the organization was set up predominantly during the pandemic. It was a LinkedIn group, and then there was a number of Zoom events. But the kind of participation levels grew very, very quickly, and now we stand at over 6,000 ambassadors representing the SPP globally. What the SPP stands for, it's all around enabling procurement people to bring sustainability into supply chains, viewing the sustainability as your responsibility, and it's all about building a sustainable future for people and planet. The vision is to have all supply chains across the world embedding procurement or sustainable procurement practices by 2030. And the strategy is a two-pillared approach. One is to empower and equip, and the second is to encourage leadership and to enable them to make the changes they need to. The goal being to positively impact 75% of the 1 million procurement professionals in decision-making roles by 2030. I'll now hand over to Joe, and just to tell you a bit more about the UK chapter. Actually, just before I do, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Seb Butt, General Manager at a supply chain intelligence company called Craft, but also co-chair alongside Joe for the SPP in the UK.
Oh, thanks, Seb. My name is Jo Parkin. I am the other co-chair for the UK chapter of Sustainable Procurement Pledge. So I am a procurement professional through and through, over 20 years working in industry across different industries, financial services, utilities, oil and gas, retail, and have covered global and UK side from both leading many sort of strategic procurement areas, outsourcing areas, and also leading those supply chains. And one of the reasons why I got involved with SPP is it really resonates with me in terms of us trying to drive the change that we need. So rather than waiting for everything to be fed down in organisations, particularly large organisations from top down, it's empowering us all as procurement professionals to make that change. So one of those reasons why we've now set up the different chapters within SPP is to allow it still to be personable, to allow us to do the networking on topics which are really pertinent to us as individuals. And so it's all about that empowering and equipping the individuals so that each and every deal that we do, the negotiations that we have, the supply chains that we can control of, we can make a difference, and therefore we can drive the sustainability agenda quicker. So I hope you enjoy us. We've got the UK chapter set up. If you haven't joined us already, please do come and find us on the SPP website. We have some events already planned for this year. This is the first of them, or the first of two, with regard to sustainability. And then we are doing some around CPO as well, but also because it's important to give them an opportunity to talk, but also most of the ones will just be open to everybody with the aim of empowering all of the procurement, particular focus on UK. You'll see on the SPP, we've got chapters for different regions, different countries, different areas, whether it's public sector, whether it's around emissions, whether it's around packaging. And the feeling is that we'll grow. So we'll do some sessions with some of our other counterparts who have specific knowledge, some of them separate. And it's really about engaging and talking And between us, we will share that knowledge and all of us move forward.
Brilliant, sure. As Joe mentioned, do join us. If you haven't registered as an ambassador already, all you need to do is go across to www.spp.earth and you can register, and then you'll have access to the shared workspace as well. One thing, just before we hand over to our guests today, we are doing a survey at the moment. I'll share this link in the chat shortly, but if you're able to spend 15 minutes doing the survey, you'll be contributing to a report that we're putting together, the Sustainable Procurement Pulse. We'll be then doing this annually, and for that 15 minutes of your time, the SPP will plant a tree on your behalf.
Oh, but also you get access to a report as well, one of the Gartner reports as well, which are actually really interesting. And then once the survey's done, you'll also get access to the Sustainable Procurement Pledge report as well. So it really doesn't take long, and it's full of lots of good information.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Right, with that, maybe just as a moment, we're starting with Sustainability 101 today because speaking to those in the UK chapter and those who are interested in joining, we kind of got a strong sense that while sustainability is a topic that everyone is keen on learning and definitely embedding within the procurement practices they're doing, maybe a bit of benchmarking, a bit of level setting, and in terms of understanding, because it is a new topic and some people are further ahead and some people are further behind and some people have understood it in different ways. So we wanted to bring together experts to really address some of the more foundational understanding of sustainability as opposed to procurement. Procurement we will focus on more next time. Today is purely sustainability. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guests. We have Dr. Alina Udall, we have Dr. Puja as well, and we've got Ed Bradford from the Good Growth Academy. So happy to have all of you guys here. I'll now stop sharing my screen and then you guys are able to kick off. One thing I'll mention to those in attendee, if you do have any questions, please either put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and what we'll do is at the end of the presentation from our guests, we'll spend some time doing some Q&A.
That's great. No, thank you, Seb. So this is Edmund Bradford. So Alina is going to put our slides up. That's brilliant. Very well done, Alina. Very quick. It's a pleasure, by the way, from my point of view. So I'm director of Good Growth Academy. I'm also a teaching associate at Warwick Business School here in the UK. You know, from my point of view, it's great. It's nice to be here. I've worked. I'm told you this, Seb. I've actually worked with procurement for many years in strategic sourcing initiatives. So, you know, I've got a huge respect for that profession. I love the stuff you're doing with SPP. It's really good. I think we're sort of kindred spirits in all this. So it's a pleasure to go through this stuff today. And because procurement has got a major role to play in driving sustainability. So you're a really good community for us to have this conversation with. So we're going to get through quite a lot of material today. I'm going to cover lots of different areas of it. The idea is we try and get that done within the hour maximum, and that leaves us 30 minutes or so for questions where we can sort of have a bit of interaction. So we'll get on with it. It's going to be a bit like Chris Whitty. I'm going to be saying to Alina, next slide, please. So apologies for that, but we just run it simply on one show rather than swapping around. So yeah, Alina, if you want to move to the next slide, that'd be great.
So first, I'm Alina. I'm just going to introduce myself, I think, just in case some of you don't know me. I'm a researcher at Newcastle University. I'm also affiliated at Warwick Business School, where I also do more supervision and teaching. And together, a bit like Ed mentioned, I'm here with Puja and Ed as part of GGA, the Good Growth Academy, where we do things like this, give presentations, as well as provide courses that we can offer. And I'll now swiftly move on to Puja, just in case she would like to introduce herself as well.
Okay, I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm Dr. Puja Costler. I've been professor in sustainability and developmental economics for 20 years of my life, changed my shoes to be a inventor in sustainability space with Intelligent, co-founder of the company, and we are now working with leading PRI signatories like United Nations, SocGen, UBS to create sustainability indexes, impact-oriented indexes. I'm also on advisory board of 2 sustainability companies, including sustainability tech company, Good Growth Academy with Ed and my partner Giorgio, and also on a real estate sustainability company in US called as Third Act.
So
excellent. And as I said to Seb, he's done a really good job because he's got sort of 3 of us for the price of 1 really on this session. So it's a good panel, and hopefully we can cover a lot of territory with all that expertise. So the only thing I'm just going to kick it off very simply, just with some useful information about why this is not a fad, why sustainability is here to stay. Yeah, thanks, Alina. So there is really, this perfect storm of sustainability coming our way, and there's a chart there showing that the growth in sustainable assets under management. There's more and more investment going into this area. This is driving a lot of change. It means that, for example, the CFO is often on the same side as sustainable professionals are, because they can see how much it affects their future share price. If you want some numbers, we think about over $30 trillion is currently invested in sustainability assets, and Bloomberg estimates that this will hit about $50 trillion of assets under management by 2025, which will be about 1/3 of all assets under management. Now, Puja, by the way, can tell you a lot about whether those funds are truly sustainable or not. That's part of a day job. But all that powerful force of investment looking for sustainable assets is a major driver of this area, and is not going away anytime soon. The other driver, of course, is government intervention. Whether that is financial intervention with the trillions of dollars you see, for example, with the sort of EU Green Deal, or the $2 trillion available from the US Green New Deal, or through legislation. For example, here in the UK, we're actually legally set up to achieve targets from the 2008 Climate Change Act. So more legislation coming our way. Governments get involved with things like COP26. So a lot of active intervention. Of course, this week in the UK, the energy strategy was announced as well. So a lot of government intervention in this area. That's not going away soon, both the local and central government as well. There's more consumer activism. Alina will talk more about that in a second. And all of that means that actually this has got a lot of C-suite focus to it. Okay. Thanks, Alina. And it's changing the landscape. So from a sort of a customer point of view, we have changing demand. So, a classic example, for example, is electric vehicles or EVs. So the forecasts around that is that the demand for EVs is probably going to increase by 13-fold in the future. So by 2030, we think that the number of electric vehicles on the world's roads will increase from 11 million to 145 million. So massive increase in demand. And there's a nice report out which has come out recently, which says about between 28 and 45% of consumers have already taken action around being more sustainable. For example, either buying more things locally, choosing more sustainable or ethical brands, or even stopping purchasing brands because of sustainable or ethical concerns. That means there's more changing solutions everywhere, from products to services to processes. We're seeing innovation in all areas, including digital. Thanks, Alina. Yeah, which means we've got changing competition. So there's some really good examples out there. Just check out those links when you get a spare moment. Really new companies sort of disrupting their industry a little bit in the way that they design, produce, and deliver their products. Okay, which means, of course, and this is interesting, whether you're looking down the supply chain to customers or up the supply chain to suppliers, is we've got changing segments. And indeed, there's a report out that was talking about a purpose-driven segment, which is about 40 40% of consumers, according to this IBM report, in this sort of purpose-driven segment, which means, I quote from them, that they're seeking products and brands that align with their lifestyle and those with health wellness benefits. And they're also willing to change their shopping habits to reduce their environmental impact. Okay, so that's a big number, big number. And of course, we're seeing not only the rise of purpose-driven segments, but also the demise of dirty segments like coal, for example. Okay, so, you know, from my strategic sourcing work, one of the things that we did was really think about how to divide up the supplier base. From that, we can think about our sourcing strategy. In my marketing work, we look downstream and think about how sustainability needs are changing, how that changes customer segments and changes our marketing strategy. So from a sustainability point of view, this has got a massive impact in a lot of things we do in terms of strategy and execution. Okay, so that's me done. Alina, I'll hand over to you because it's a good time now, I think, to get down to consumers, because to understand this subject, it's really good to think about the end consumer first. Okay, thank you, Alina.
Thank you. Yes, my area is zooming in on what we saw a bit earlier about the consumer activism, I suppose, or focusing on you and I as individuals and what we can contribute first before we can think about the bigger picture. And so what we know about people in general and how we behave, regardless of the context, this could be within your organization, how you behave, this could be how you behave at your home. And what we notice in the literature is that we can broadly categorize this information as people behaving in ways that they intend to, which can explain about 7% of behavior. However, we are also moral agents. So when we add morality to this intention, we find that we can understand behavior even more so by an extra 4%. However, most importantly and critical, and this is what makes it so difficult for behavior to be changed in the first place, is that an additional 57% of behavior can be explained by habit. We act as automatic agents. We have very busy lives and we're trying to juggle very many different things. So we often act heuristically. We just go to what is our default, what we understand and what we know in the here and now. So that's one area that we could tackle within an organization, how we could change and challenge habits. But also as a psychologist, an environmental psychologist, I would label myself perhaps, that we also want to make this 100%. We explain behavior 100%. So 32% of behavior in the literature to date still is unexplained by these general factors that we found. So what we did and what I've been doing with my work is try and identify that a bit more specifically and understand that information and how can we reduce that 32% a bit more. Building on what Ed said, this idea of segmentation, that actually people are different and that we can divide the population up in certain ways, what we notice is that it's not just these psychological motivations that are important. There's these actual physical opportunities. Do you have the opportunity to have a link or a supplier give you sustainable options? And for example, do we have the capabilities or knowledge? You're all here today to learn a bit more about sustainability, and that is the first starting point. And you all probably have a lot of knowledge already, but what we've noticed is that we all have gaps in our knowledge, and that also is something that we need to figure out a little bit more, how we can close that gap more. And depending on these three factors that you see, motivation, opportunity, and capabilities, we believe that that 32% of behavior can be explained even further. So if people score really highly on having all of this knowledge, all this motivation, and all this opportunity, people will behave ultimately in the desired way. However, if these people score lowly on these different factors, that we find that actually people struggle to perhaps meet the sustainability goals that were required. And understanding these barriers are really important, because sometimes we just physically don't have those opportunities, and sometimes the knowledge isn't there to actually be able to make the change. And understanding that and accepting that is also very important. What I will do now is zoom in on one area specifically that I work on, which is the psychology and the motivation. And what we've also developed is like a radar thing to enable us to understand the psychology behind consumers. So I'm not ignoring the opportunities and the capabilities, but for brevity, I'm just going to focus on one of these areas that I focus more on in my work. And what we've noticed is that the first point of call is this motivation that we have is that people can be divided up within motivation, that people can have a personality that's a bit altruistic, a bit hedonistic, a bit egoistic, and a bit biospheric. What that means is when it's altruism, people in some ways appreciate how they can behave in ways that support people. When it's hedonistic, we sometimes just do things because they're nice and they're fun. Like somebody mentioned that they're having a drink tonight, and we just do that because it makes us happy. They're egoistic. It's really, really important to understand that each and every one of us needs to protect our ego. We do have our own personal motives, and we need to appreciate how they contribute. And finally, the most helpful one that we do find in terms of sustainability is this biospheric value, that people like to help the planet purely for the planet's sake, not necessarily for their own sake, egoistic, or for fun, hedonistic, or because it helps people, altruistic. And what we notice in the literature and what we notice about people is that you can score on this. It's a spectrum. You don't just have one or the other, you have a combination of all four to different extents, and depending on what setting you're in. Perhaps when you're at home with your family, you might have more of an altruistic one. Perhaps when you're at work with a sustainable organization, you might have more of a biospheric value. But all of these values will be held together at once to lesser or greater extents. And that's what we believe helps contribute to this area of trying to explain behavior a bit more. What we've done is then see if we can test that in real life and see if it affects people's uptake of new products that we were developing for my work with the company that I'm working with. And we looked at these values that we tested. We also looked at how we see ourselves, our identity. Like right now, I see myself as a presenter, an environmental psychologist, but I can also see myself in different ways, depending on the context. And when we measured those alongside what we think about intentions, morals, and habits, and how they contribute to why we do what we do, we actually found that they were able to explain behavior a bit better. And so identity and values are important for encouraging people to purchase, in this context, new water saving products that we had developed. And they did this even when the consumers weren't going to save any money. So it's really important that people do consume in sustainable ways, sometimes depending on what motivations we're tapping into, for example. So that brings me to the end of my area in terms of consumer psychology, environmental psychology. Now I head over to Ed and Puja to contribute with regards to speak sustainability. What are some key terms that we need to think about? First of all, I'll draw your attention to the Sustainable Development Goals. And thank you, Puja, for turning the camera on, because I thought maybe I was on my own temporarily. Shall I hand over to you for this section?
Sure, you may. So we are talking about sustainability here, and there are multiple definitions of sustainability. But as a planet, as a global commitment, what we reach, that we want to reach from sustainability perspective is beautifully defined in UN Sustainability Development Goals. You will see here goals from no poverty to the goals of reduced inequalities, to the goals like climate, to the goals like partnership for the goals. So these 17 goals are very important, and we are moving towards recognizing importance of these goals every day. But the problem is that where the world is restrictive is to recognize how we can measure these goals, how we can quantify these goals. So when we make our decision as a consumer, as an investor, as an employee of a company, we can make sure that our lifestyle, personally, professionally, is aligned with that goals. There are a lot of data companies, research companies, education companies, which are building up on the measurements and quantification of these goals. But goals are important. They are the destination, but it is also very important to have a GPS for the goals where we can see that how much we have achieved and how much distance we have to cover. So we need more attention to build the GPS of these goals moving forward. Next slide, please. Some measurement standards that support these goals directly are examples like the UN Global Compact score. These scores, if you will Google on very many companies, you can also get as an open source information because this is for the greater good. So these UN Global Compact scores deeply look into the companies that are dealing with child labor, weapons, tobaccos, drugs, smuggling. They identify the supply chain of these companies and provide information to you as investors, as consumers, as employees to make decisions which are somewhat in alignment to measure the UN goals. These scores are getting a lot of popularity. I work in my day-to-day life to structure investment products like exchange traded funds, separate managed account, mutual funds, unified managed accounts. And a lot of investors I work with demand that we should use a screening algorithm based on this UN Global Compact scores. They're very adamant that they don't want to invest in the companies that are ranked low or that are identified as laggards, not meeting the UN sustainability goals. So this way, investors can use the power of the capital markets to drive money in the right directions. But I believe this responsibility is not only on investors. We need to scale this responsibility beyond investors. So as a consumer, also, if we can make decisions based on buying products from the companies which are laggard, then maybe through engagement of our consumption or not consumption, these companies will come and choose the right way moving forward if they haven't chosen yet. So this is a very important resource for us being any kind of stakeholder in market as a consumer or as an investor or as an employee. Next slide, please. So ESG is a beautiful word. It is bigger than just its abbreviation for environmental, social, and governance. Its purpose is much bigger. The purpose of ESG is that, we are getting so much used to the method of traditional capitalization where our focus is only on companies' profits, but not how these profits are made. We are getting better every day. And instead of just believing in extreme capitalism, we are moving towards a more social, inclusive world where we are trying to integrate planet, people, and prosperity all together in making our investment decision. We are continuously hearing how companies are performing on the climate front, and we are continuously hearing warning from multiple scientists who are working with United Nations International Panel for Climate Change that we are already too late to catch the train if we really want to live on a planet where the carbon emissions can control the global warming under 2.0 degrees centigrade. And what we are doing right now is passing the parcel. Companies are passing the parcel to government that there are no rules. Government is saying that there is no data. And if we make these reporting mandatory, then it will be costly for the companies and we may not see business expansions. So we need to grow out of this passing the parcel game and take ownerships where we have core metrics, expanded metrics to measure whether we can achieve this trinity of planet, prosperity, and people all together. where we can see our consumptions, our investments, our professional lives aligned with these social development goals. And if we are able to do that all together as a person, every one of us, instead of passing the parcel of responsibility to other person, then only we can save our climate. So I believe right now is that climate change is today's problem, not tomorrow's. So if we don't do something today, maybe we will live in a world where it's no tomorrow. I really loved one documentary. I believe most of you might have seen that, Don't Look Up. And that documentary is sending that strong message that we have to open our eyes and realize what the big problem we are facing. We really have to see what comet is, and the comet here is climate.
Excellent. Thank you, Puja. Thank you. And I mean, Puja's using a lot of terms there. We've already started using a lot of terms in this presentation, and I think it's useful, especially when you're thinking about ESG, to start with the goal. What is the goal? And actually, what's interesting is that being sustainable, if the goal is sustainable, that actually is a fairly moderate goal. So let's look at this. I mean, sustainability, by the way, means a balance where value extraction matches value creation. And as I said, it's got limited benefit. Now, to understand that, let's start at the bottom, shall we? So, Alina, if you just do that, thank you. So, the old model, the old take, make, waste business model, that's been going on for hundreds of years. Businesses and perhaps industries that have been doing that and are doing that, they're in the sort of the extractive goal, really. So not very ambitious, not very sustainable at all. That's kind of the lowest level of sustainability. Above that, thank you, Alina, above that we have renewable. So this is where companies, firms, organizations, for example, are using solar power, maybe wind power to help generate their electricity, their energy usage. And so they're using resources that can be naturally replenished. And we have sustainable, as we talked about, but sustainable really, if you had to put a sort of phrase on it, sustainable really means do no harm to the world, do no harm to people. Better than that, a bit more ambitious than that is what we call restorative. And that's restoring social and ecological systems to a more healthy, impactful and stable state. So for example, in agriculture, in farming in the UK, now there's a lot of activity thinking about how do we improve the quality of the soil, for example. How do we turn it back to how it was before we started using a lot of pesticides, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to improve the world that we live in. And at the top of that, the most ambitious goal of all, which very few businesses really do drive to aim for, is to be regenerative. And that is all about enabling social and ecological systems to maintain a healthy, impactful, and stable state and continue indefinitely to evolve, grow, and scale. So it's a long-term approach to sustainability where we have healthy, long-term improvement to the planet, to society, and to the world. Okay, thank you, Lena. So what we've done, and this you may find this helpful, what we've done is pulled a lot of the thinking together and created what we call a 6P sustainability model, just so we can understand some of the terms. The 4 Ps that you see from ESG, from Puja's earlier slide, that's in there. The planet, prosperity, people, and principles. And what we've done is kind of pulled out and highlighted 2 important things, which I think get a bit buried sometimes in ESG language, which is profits, because that's important, and the purpose, as I just mentioned, the purpose of the organization. So from that, you can actually generate a nice statement that says, well, what is a sustainable organization? Well, it has these characteristics. It's a purpose-driven organization, or has purpose-driven leadership that delivers, not just plans, but delivers good, sustainable prosperity. That means prosperity in the community, in the areas which it operates, more widely as well. It enhances the planet, as well. And at the same time, it treats people inclusively, ethically. It adopts good governance principles. So, for example, it's very ethical. Yeah. And all of that drives long-term sustainable profits. Okay. So there's a nice statement there that you can use when you're thinking about what is a sustainable organization and what characteristics does it actually have. It's ESG compliant. It fits in with the UN SDGs that Puja mentioned earlier as well. And we can also use it to help us think about some of the terms as well. So, you know, we don't get confused. So Puja, if you want to go to that next slide. So, yes, what I find interesting about this subject is that you can have two people talking about sustainability, but they both are talking about two very different things. So one person might be talking about the planet, yeah, another person might be talking about social impact, for example, or social purpose. Okay, so these are nice. This is a nice little diagram. Again, you can use that as you wish to help you understand some of the terms. So, for example, CSR. When people talk about CSR, they tend to be talking about those top three petals, if you like, the planet, prosperity, and people. When people are talking about the triple bottom line, which has been around for a couple of decades, they tend to be talking about the three P's of prosperity, planet, and profits. Sorry, of planet, people, and profits. Okay. But when we're talking about ESG or responsible business, then we're talking about the whole thing. Okay. So as anything, any other subject that you're getting your head into, understanding the scope of it is really important. And what we do, you know, when we're talking to people is to make sure in the early days of any conversation you're having is that you've got the same understanding of the goal and the scope around sustainability before you get into deeper areas. Okay, thank you, Lena. So no, with that in mind, I'll hand back to Puja, who's going to give you a lot more thinking around a headline subject, of course, climate change and global warming. Thank you, Puja.
Second, I'm back. So here is the system on climate monitoring, which is getting very important. And it is not only the voice of climate scientists right now, it is the voice of many task forces like social financial related disclosure, in short, SFDR in Europe. In America, we have TCFD, which is led by Bloomberg, Task Force on Financial Related Disclosure. We have rules and mandates coming in Security Exchange also, where climate reporting is coming in prime time. And this information is the information that was available since history, since our COP was invented. Right now, people are feeling the rage of the climate more than any year before. I live in Colorado, and we get a fire alert now every 6-8 months. Last year, we lost 700 houses in Colorado because of wildfires. I know very many of you are also living in the world where you are close to hurricanes, droughts, or maybe heat that you have never experienced before. So this reality is felt by people, by investors, by consumers, and to take up action on this reality is very, very important. Now, emissions are already there, and it is not the question about how to reduce emissions today. It is the question about, with reducing these emissions, how we can take out existing carbon through sequester processes from the atmosphere to make or to achieve the climate targets of 1.5 degree or 2 degree climate change until 2100 that was decided by COP, for a planet that is livable without very many weather changes or climate changes that we are experiencing in day-to-day life. Here, you will see some climate pathways from where we are at business as usual scenario and where we want to go to under 2 degree scenario, 1.7 degree climate target, and how much carbon reductions are required, how much carbon exclusions are required from our atmosphere to reach those targets. The problem is there, it is acknowledged but solutions are not yet there. So organizations, capital markets, consumers have to now think that how they can accelerate these solutions. We see a lot of voice from the government. They are trying to put rules into the place, but these rules are taking time, and these rules have to be more stringent before it is too late. So we want to see more activism from consumers, even from regulators, to make sure that these rules are binding, and businesses, companies, and consumers are answerable to these goals if we really want to live in a planet where we have a climate target of under 2.0 degree scenario. Next slide. This is a very powerful slide to think upon. 500 plus companies are responsible for major percentage of the carbon, more than 60% of the carbon. 20% of these companies are Fortune 500 companies. They belong to 39 countries. And this system is very, very focused. And we see the drive, which is very beautiful, that investors are now, investing in clean technology companies. More drive is going, or more money is going towards fossil fuel free companies, but still the phase out of fossil fuel is not designed well. You and I cannot camp all of our life staying in the tents without electricity. So our decision made where problem is solved, our decision made where we are not investing in sustainability solution, but we are investing in financing the sustainability solution. There is a very thin line of difference between sustainability solution and financing the sustainability solution. And the difference is that investing in sustainability, you invest in green companies, but investing in financing sustainability, you invest in the dark brown companies, energy, utility company. One of this company that is the highest carbon contributor, but if it is reducing its footprint, because percentage of reduction where the scale is big will globally matter in terms of carbon added to our atmosphere. And this is what we need our drive towards if we really want to reach those IPCC targets of under 2.0 degree temperature change that we want to expect, or that we want for us and our future in 2100. Next slide, please. So here is a good example of cumulative emissions of carbon and future non-carbon radioactive, forcing and determining the probability of limiting it to 1.5 degree. So there are very many climate models, and the good part is that the knowledge of the climate model is also open source. If you will look at NGFS, you will see very many climate modelers, including RCP and Remind, GCAM, have contributed climate scenarios to this website. This allows you to see different futures or different possibilities, including carbon tax, changes in electrification rate, like we see more electric cars on the road than we have ever seen before, more solar panels on roofs that we have ever seen before. So these changes of orderly and disorderly climate transitions are represented in multiple scenarios that NGFS collects. Now, this gives you the target or possible futures that we can reach tomorrow by making the change today. And to compare where companies are today in a sector, in a region, and how much carbon reductions are required for those companies to achieve the global aggregate reductions that we target for an under 2.0 degree climate scenario. So, if we have a destination, it is easy to map a road towards destination. So these are kind of various routes in a GPS, which as a country, as a globe, we can take from company level to firm level to even a business unit level to achieve this under 2.0 degree target These are not just pieces of science. These are the targets, very much the applications that we can utilize by declaring the objectives of the companies, by declaring the missions and mandates of the company, by bringing these goals, not in just labeling the company green, but bringing these goals in the achievements that we need to reach a greener planet. Next slide, please. So I know that scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 reporting is getting better. Scope 1, scope 2 specifically, where there are data providers like Refinitiv, ISS, and including the Climate Disclosure Project, the CDP project, where companies, especially in Europe, have started reporting their scope 1, scope 2 emissions. Scope 3, there is not a right way to do it. There are multiple proposals to get the best estimate of it. But if there is not a right way to do it, it doesn't mean that we don't do it. We still have to do it in the best possible way we can to save the planet, because most of the emissions come from scope 3 emissions. If they are unrecorded, if they are not transparently reported, then we have a big problem to solve, because we cannot lay down a plan that we need to achieve the planetary goals that we need. The difference between scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emission is very simple. Scope 1 are the direct emissions, like how much emissions your plant is producing by itself today. Scope 2 depends upon the electricity and the emission caused by energy consumption by the company. Scope 3 includes everything like transportation, shipping, and this major area of the business is unaccounted for. Maybe a technological company is a dirty company because the scope 3 emissions are huge, like Amazon, but scope 1, scope 2 emissions are controlled. So we cannot ignore scope 3 emissions. I know there is not a perfect way to measure it, but we really have to jump up and utilize whatever information we have and start measuring it. If not the absolute, but the best number we can get through the current available data and systems. Next slide, please. Now, the window of action is closing very, very fast. The carbon budgets that were decided 20 years ago for our planet are wrapping up so fast that we can consume the whole amount of carbon budgets in next 5 years that is left for us to consume till 2050. So we really have to slow down in our carbon. If we don't slow down in our carbon, then we will see more of the climate revenge on us in terms of fires, hurricanes, heat, ice melts, floods, and we really have to check our options here. The options are limited. And sacrifices are there, and companies, capital markets have to look more deeply into actions right now and stop talking, because we don't want to miss the train. And what we see in the market is more noise and less action, and we have to now see more actions and less noise in the market. Next. So this is a project of science-based target, Climate Disclosure Project, and World Resource Institute and WWF are the big sponsors of this project. The project is designed to develop, promote, and validate the company's carbon targets, climate targets, to see whether companies are doing what they are saying or not. There is a very scientific measurement involved where companies' current emissions are recorded, what companies' reductions are desired as a contributor to reach under 2.0 degree climate targets. That difference for every 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is calculated, and monitoring is done whether companies are achieving their targets as they have promised or they are behind. And it is good to see that a lot of companies are participating in science-based target. It is good to see that as a researcher, there is more data available, but it is very hard to see that less than 5% of the companies are on target. So reporting is good, but reporting is only the half side of the story. We need a complete story here. We need accountability. And when accountability will match reporting, then only we can live in a world what we desire to live in. That is a greener world, not a world where we are at a 4.5 degree temperature change in 2100, not the business as usual scenario. The business as usual scenario is not sustainable. Next slide, please.
Just one thing to note. Someone raised their hand. Shall we, I think it was Maxwell, shall we take that at the end, or shall we, Joe?
Totally up to you. Which would you prefer? If you've paused for a moment.
Yeah, could we pause for a moment, just because it could be timely, if that's all right with Maxwell.
Maxwell?
Maxwell, you should be able to ask your question now. I've given you speaker rights.
Thank you.
Shall I continue?
Maxwell, if you're trying to talk and you're there, do you want to put it in the chat?
Yeah, Maxwell, if you place it in the chat, we'll definitely come back to you. Thank you. We'll let Puja continue. I appreciate that.
So how do you join science-based initiative? It is very easy, and that is the first step to start, reporting, and accountability comes with reporting. So you have to commit as how much your company wants to reduce the carbon. You have to set up a target which is feasible for your company, and you have to develop a plan across that target, because a target without a plan is incomplete. That what all changes you can make in various departments and various personals and the various operations of the company to reach that target. You have to submit that target and the plan towards this target to SBTi website. It is open source, and a huge amount of information is available there. Huge amount of tracking is available here. And it is always good to announce that you are a part of SBTi target, but also to show that you have kept your promises and you have reached that target. And if you have missed that target, it is also good to announce, because you know that you have a good catch-up to do for the next year or next announcement. So the process is very simple. So SBTi has issued a call to action guideline. This guidelines is available. I would recommend here the attendees of the webinar to see the action guideline. I know it is time consuming. I know it will include a lot of thought process, especially, developing the plan and setting up the targets that are achievable or that your companies can achieve. But I also know that it is doable. Companies are doing it, and you will not be the first person doing it. There are a lot of case studies available now for the companies that have shown that they have announced that they are with their targets. There are a lot of examples setting around. There are leaders, and it's time when we follow those leaders who have made a difference to make more difference.
And to add on, Puja, and maybe this is sort of a starting point, remember to think small as well, and start with, we were discussing earlier, that you don't necessarily have to be getting the ultimate goal and doing it absolutely perfectly. It's about piloting it, getting it started, making an action plan and evidencing how successful that is, and appreciating that it might not be, but it's okay, and you can learn from that quickly. That's what I thought we were discussing earlier today, about doing it sort of in that way. And there you go. Over back to you, Puja.
Next slide.
Do you see it okay?
Yeah. So I also want to put some clarity on the net zero definition. So people get a lot of confusion over here that what does net zero mean? And they are making their investment choices based on this net zero statement. I want to make a very important point here. Net zero is different from zero. We cannot live in a world where carbon emissions are zero. So net zero means where the carbon production at a company level matches carbon reduction. So if the company like Amazon have produced X tons of carbon, it should reduce X tons of carbon than what it has reported before from its supply chain, from its processes, from its transportation, adding more green vehicles for the delivery system. So net means here a difference between production and reductions, which is very much achievable. It's not a goal which companies cannot achieve.
So would it be, just to ask, is this relating to, say, carbon offsetting then? Is that where this definition lies?
That is true, Elena. It means your offset should match your upsets in like what you add to it.
Yeah. Cool. So carbon offsetting could be one way to enable you to meet those net zero, and rather than focusing on just not consuming or making the reduction of your consumption, sometimes just doing other things that take the carbon out could be a way forward. Over back to you, Puja.
Yes, so we are living in a world where it is a code red for humanity. This is announced by IPCC reports continuously and in every report. And one thing we have gotten better at is setting up the records. Highest CO2 concentration ever experienced in 2 million years. Fastest rate of sea level rise experienced in 3,000 years. Arctic sea ice area observed at its lowest level in 1,000 years. Glaciers retreat unprecedented in 2,000 years. Let's stop setting up these climate records. These are not good for us. These are not good for planet. These are not good for humanity and planet.
And adding to that, these will directly impact your companies as well, in the same way that we also have the COVID that happened. The fact is that what's happening now is that we're increasing more diseases and bugs and illnesses that are as a result of these rising levels. And that is actually negatively now probably impacting some industries, especially the hospitality industry and things like that. So it's important to remember how being sustainable could actually be more profitable for your organization if we think more deeply about how these levels are affecting us. And move on to the next slide and pass. Oh, thank you, Puja, sorry.
I would totally agree with Alina. And on my last slide, I would introduce concept of double materiality. So if you look at the organization, look into double materiality. The first face of the coin of double materiality is that how your company is impacting the environment. What is the scope 1, scope 2 emission? What is your impact on sea level rise? What is the impact on pollution and other stuff? Second face of the coin here is that how risky is your company? How your company will be impacted by the environment? What is the physical risk exposure in terms of sea level rise, hurricanes, heat, fires to your company? What is the transition risk exposure in terms of carbon tax coming up, policy changes, rule changing, electrification changes, behavior changes, economic changes to your company? So look for double materiality when you look into setting up goals, reports, or accountability. So here is where I will explain how much the second face of the coin, the risk here that your companies could face globally. So Economic Intelligence Unit announced that it is about $4 to $14 trillion at risk from present to 2100. This estimate of risk by London School of Economics is anywhere between $3 to $24 trillion, and UNEP-FI, which is United Nations Environmental Programme Financial Initiative, expects that risk to be globally $11 trillion. So your company is a part or a subset of this huge risk that is in front of us today because of climate change.
Next.
What does climate risk actually mean to the investor? How can investors measure climate risk? What does climate risk matter now, and why it is material now? These are the questions we all are trying to answer right now. Climate risk means to investors not only the risk that their balance sheet or P&L indicators are exposed to, it also means reputational risk, because if they don't do good, investors and consumers will make these companies low popular. Their valuations will be highly exposed to risk, and we will see the capital markets selecting out these companies. How can investors measure climate risk? There is a lot of work done on climate risk measurements, both from physical risk perspective. Companies like Moody's 427, True Value Labs, Puja Costler are coming up, where they're providing a lot of physical risk data, like risk from heat, hurricanes, fires. Plus, there are a lot of data companies which are looking into climate risk from transition risk point of view. The company Intelligent, where I work for, Carbon Delta, Otic Finance, I have a couple of examples. So there are multiple lenses that are available to measure risk. Now it's time to utilize these multiple lenses together and see what is best for your company, how you can put the measurements, and how you can keep your company in the good measurements or good rating systems for these companies. Why does climate risk matter now and it is material now? Because we are living in a world of pandemics, of physical disasters, and it's the time where we make the change before world is changed. So we have seen that even in the climate risk measurement space, there are two definitions. One definition is how companies are impacting the environment, as I mentioned before, the double materiality case. What is the company's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions? I already discussed scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions in a previous slide. In this slide, I will focus on how companies will be impacted by the environmental changes, where there are a couple of definitions or a couple of lenses to measure this risk. The first one is physical risk. Physical risk is that how much exposure a company have to risk like hurricanes, fire, sea level rise, heat, and other physical attacks that climate make on humanity. These can be either unspontaneous, or they can be chronicle, like temperature rises, sea level rise, which happens as a nature course of action. Transition risk is the risk that if we don't want to live in the current world, the rules and regulations will come change. We will see more of carbon taxes. We will see more of carbon border taxes. Europe is talking strongly about border taxes, which is one of my favorite subjects to see and observe how this natural experiments phase out or helps in phasing out fossil fuels. And we are also in the middle of where we want to change the climate. We are facing wars, Ukraine and Russia, where we are seeing that energy consumption could increase. So how these transition could impact your company, that is an important avenue to look at. Liability risk is that the risk in companies' loan book, especially the loan book of banks, where they provide loans to the company. If those companies are exposed to these physical and transition risks, then indirectly we are going to spread this risk in an economic systems, and banks, eventually wealth managers, eventually reinvest in the companies as stockholders too. Or everybody is going to be in a part of this liability risk equation if economically this risk is not checked. Reputational risk is getting big. Companies who are the measuring, the monitoring of companies' actions is getting greater and greater. The ratings on companies' action is getting bigger and bigger. We have more information as investors and consumers than ever before, and it is very important for companies to come out as green if they really want to secure the interest of both investors and consumers. So reputational risk is a big risk. But there is a problem in a reputational risk. A lot of companies are trying to be green for their investors and consumers, but they are washing themselves green, not being green. So there is a very thin line between greenwashing and green. And somehow as investors and consumers, we have to become smarter to see what is the thin line, whether the company is doing what it is claiming and whether it's doing right for the planet or not. Next slide. So how can investors measure climate risk? So I know that in Europe, the sustainability financial disclosures are getting stronger. Every quarter, we get improvements and additions of metrics and measurement standards. Here also in the United States, where I sit, the task force of climate financial disclosure is getting very popular. In fact, pension funds like United Nations Joint Staff Pension Fund have worked to show the world as a case study how this reporting could look like. The first important factor of this reporting is governance. Sustainability has to go from the basement to every company's boardroom. It has to come in the mission and objectives of the company, and the governance structures around this have to be very strong. We need a sustainability committee in every boardroom for the company right now to account and to make sure that sustainability lives top to down and flows top to down in every company. Strategy. So every company needs a plan to reach these goals, objectives, missions, and mandates. And these strategies of the company should be published and available to their stakeholders, to their consumers. So stakeholders and consumers can, show how companies are transferring or how they are changing their pathways towards the net zero goal or low carbon goals. Risk management, how company is exposed to multiple kinds of risks that I described on the last slide, and how the measurement and metrics are set up about this risk, so transparently this risk can be forwarded. So these systems have to come up both in subjective order and in objective order for the companies moving forward. We need both quantitative and qualitative data. We need both backward-looking data like Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. On top of that, we also need a forward-looking data to see what companies will be profitable in a 2-degree scenario or a 1.5-degree scenario. So we need a combination of forward-looking and data and backward-looking data. Scenario analysis is very important because future is uncertain. Scenario analysis is not new. A lot of investors do scenario analysis on situations, but now we need a climate-focused scenario analysis, and it is getting stronger day by day. And climate models, their predictions are getting stronger day by day. So we really have to use more and more climate scenario analysis while setting up these reporting objectives. Time is of essence. We need action today.
Well, thank you, Puja. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, the risk, all your commentary about risk, I think speaks very much to the procurement community as one of the major tasks there. So I'm going to just very quickly. I'm looking at time, so I really want to cover this bit very quickly, so we've got time for Q&A. I just want, because Seb asked us to mention this, I'm just going to briefly touch on a couple of subjects here. First of all, let's look at circularity. So Alina, would you like to move on? When we talk about sustainability, you're often talking about circular thinking, and is moving away from that old take, make, waste approach that I mentioned earlier to a more closed system type of thinking. If you want to know more about this, by the way, just go to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website, and you can find out much more about this area as well as other areas. So you can see a diagram there, and the idea is, Alina, if you just click on, yeah. So we're trying to minimize the energy of finite materials inputs into the system. Yeah, we're also trying to minimize the waste outputs that come out of the system. And the way we do that is we recycle, refurbish, we manufacture, reuse, redistribute, etc. And then we also, thank you, Alina, we also then feed that back into the production of the materials itself. So it's like a closed loop system rather than a linear end-to-end system. And that's pretty much what circular thinking is all about. Okay, big subject, lots of books about it. So do go away and dig into it deeply if you want to find out more, but that's it in essence. Next slide, thank you, Elena. And then the other thing that's interesting, and I'm an ex-economist for my sins, but the other thing that's interesting is that when you think about sustainability, of course, you get into this issue about growth, and there's even a community of degrowth out there. And the idea is that just growth isn't necessarily the right goal. So the old system is, more and more GDP growth, the better. The more and more revenue growth, the better. Yeah, that's kind of like an old value extraction model. The new thinking is that we have the idea of good growth, which is sustainable, safe, and just. So the donut idea is quite simple. There's a whole book around this, which you could look into if you want to. But if you have a shrinking economy, then the danger is then that you go below a basic social foundation. You get poverty, you get problems with maybe discrimination, inequality, etc., and you get an unhappy population. Okay. At the other end, if you have very fast growth that is, using up a lot of the planet's resources, the danger is then is that you break through this kind of ecological ceiling and you end up with a very unhappy planet. Okay? In the middle, there's a sort of the right amount of growth, which is right for society. Okay. Now, there's a lot of debate about what the level is, but that's the thinking behind it. It's no longer about the more growth, the better. It's more about having the right amount of growth, which is sustainable for society and for the planet and for the world. Okay. Lena, let's move on. Greenwashing, we spend a whole day talking about greenwashing, but there's a definition there which is quite good. I think the simplest way to think about greenwashing is that you've got a firm who is sitting somewhere on the pyramid that we talked about earlier, but is claiming to be somewhere else. And we were talking about this earlier, and Puja, for example, was saying one good way, for example, is to compare their statements, their public statements, with their sustainability reports. Okay, and you can track. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of publicly available information which shows their sustainability data. You can actually go to these websites and check what is being claimed versus what the actual reality is. Okay.
And I think also, I would like to interject as well. I think what's important is as well, in greenwashing, it's important to note the intention to deceive, and it's the idea that it's deliberate. However, we have to understand that we might make claims within our organization or our business that we believe are true, and it's not greenwashing if we believed it was true, and then once we're given information to falsify that it becomes untrue, then the greenwashing would be by not changing that practice. But if you change your practice as a result of that new information, then that's completely acceptable. And it's about realizing what's important is that what we know today and tomorrow will keep on changing, and it's about adapting your organization when that new information comes in, and recognizing that there might be mistakes or we might get misinformation, but then addressing that and updating that to ensure that we have integrity, I think, which is the key. Yeah,
right. Okay. Thank you. So just a couple of useful resources for you. Thank you, Lee. Just move on. If any of you want to dig into this a lot deeper, there's a whole course we've created on this, which actually, interestingly, the next cohort starts very soon on 25th of April. So it's CPD approved. We've got a nice discount that we set up for everybody on this webinar, and it gets a little bit off the price. The nice thing about it is you can study at your own pace. We have more interactive sessions with a panel. We had another one today with one of our cohorts. And you've also got a market assessment at the end if you want to do that. And also, of course, if there's a lot of people in your company who want to go through that and get a common foundation of understanding of sustainability, and of course we can do lots of great corporate discounts. We do that with our partner, which is Oxford College of Marketing. So do get in touch with Alex there if you want to know more about that. He'll be delighted to talk to you about what the course is all about. The landing page is there as well if you want to check out the course on the landing page. And finally, final point for me, Lena, thank you.
Next.
Yeah. Final thing is that we've also got a simulation, which is really quite interesting. It's an online game. Individuals or teams represent brands in the global industry, and they compete against each other for sustainable success. So that you actually practice this art of balancing sustainable growth with all the sustainability ESG metrics. And the nice thing is, because it's a game, it's kind of enjoyable and effective learning, and really good for in-company online programs, whether that's a two-day workshop or spread over several weeks. And we're already using that platform in universities and corporations already. It's really, really, really good. Okay, so do get in touch if you want to find out more about that. Okay, great stuff. I really do want to get on to questions. So Alina, if you want to just move on to that final slide. Let's open it up, Joe, and that'd be great if you help with any really good questions. We'll do our best to answer them.
That was amazing, by the way, guys. I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this. We didn't give you the easiest of tasks, and you managed to compress a huge amount of material in the last hour. So really appreciate it. We have got some questions, so we'll kick off with those. So Rick has asked the question: do you accept that ESG is a new cost, and if so, who pays for it and how?
Shall I begin?
Yes, please, Elena.
I can begin simply, but Puja, I know, can dive in a bit deeper. We pay the price, and that's something that we must accept. But as Puja said earlier, that does help. That does help us become sustainable and for your organization to be profitable in the longer term. And yes, so companies are, and indirectly clients will be paying. That's from how I perceive it. But Puja, do you have any more to allude to that, and maybe how we could support organizations maybe in that price that they, that upfront cost, as it were?
So Elena, I know that there is an upfront cost. In fact, where I sit, I meet a lot of stakeholders, and when the rules are coming up in Europe and United States, they're saying that, who's going to make a lot of money because of these rules? The accounting companies. Because then KPMGs and other accounting firms will take that charge, because it's a huge opportunity to solve this problem and make the systems where we can get more transparency on accounting, on climate and ESG front. I know that there is an upfront cost, but I also know that there is a diminishing cost. Like doing it once is costly. But then if you have to do it the second time, the third time, the fourth time, then your company has already learned it. Then you can replicate what you have done the first year and produce reports for second year, third year, fourth year, and so on. So upfront cost is definitely there, and this is a diminishing cost. Every other TCFD or sustainability report or ESG report for the company will be less costly than the first report.
And there are, by the way, there are good examples out there of companies that already have gone down the sustainability route with products, but have actually positioned the brand much more in segments which were happy to pay more for sustainable and ethical product services and corporate brands. So in terms of customers paying for it, definitely there's room to be clever about how you do your strategy, how you do your marketing and positioning, to make sure that the people that really want to pay for it do pay for it. And it actually goes, by the way, it goes back to the biospheric stuff that Alina was talking about earlier. Is if you are going to charge more money, you want to be orienting around those consumers that are much more biospherically oriented. Okay, yeah, okay, so maybe that's helpful on one of the questions.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Let's have a look at another question. So Clay's asking, how does the concept of good growth deal with huge human population growth? Is there a limit to how many humans the Earth can sustainably accommodate? And she's read 3 to 4 billion is the maximum, but some texts seem to suggest 14 billion would be fine. I guess an interesting one to explore.
Yeah, well, I'm tempted to pick that one up, but shall I try? Puja, do you want to try first on that one, or do you want me to pick that up?
Ed, I will let you pick up, because I'm making sure everybody gets an answer. And if you see me, okay, eyes rolling, I'm typing and answering the Q&As. I'm not answering any other emails, I promise.
Well, the simple answer is actually very difficult to answer that question. That's why it's an easy one to take, because there's been this debate for hundreds of years, and there's various models that say that the pace of innovation, if that carries on at the same pace, then we can cope with increasing population even with a limited planet, because innovation will see us through. The problem is there's lots of interesting stats around this, but the problem is, for example, even with raw materials, over the last couple of hundred years, raw materials have kind of gone down in price, but now are reaching a point where they're getting quite limited, and so they're starting to go up again. So innovation has got to work even harder and faster to maintain that price. So there's a lot of concerns around it. The simple truth of the matter is, we, as a human race, we don't know the best thing we can do is our own little part as consumers, as well as influencers within our organizations, to be as sustainable as possible.
Yes, and I would add to what Ed said, that that's not the only question for you. That is the question for me and everybody, that how this planet is going to sustain so many humans. But equality is a very important trait here to solve this problem. We have 5% of the people using maximum resources on our planet right now. I'm not too off on my statistics, I can be a little off. So, equal distribution of wealth and equal distribution of resources and opportunity can solve this problem a lot, where not 5% of the people are using multiple planet resources.
And
Brilliant.
I would like to just add that even though we're not sure, and even though it's tricky, to remember your contribution, what you can do. I've always said this, it only takes one person to make a change and an impact, and you have to start there. Just because other people and other organizations are not doing it, it does not mean that you do not have to do this, or that you can't make a difference, because every small change does matter and it can add up to a big one. And I'd really like that to happen for everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. Another one is, we as in the consumer, passing on additional costs is very controversial right now with the cost of living crisis. Do you think people will play the long game? And then the writer, Rick, says, I will, but under extreme financial pressure right now, it may be a struggle to prioritize ESG. Would love your thoughts on that topic.
Go, Puja.
Okay, so I have shared an article about the last question about resources used by the richest of the world. I think that will be a good article for you guys to read, but I'm going to answer this question as well, that there is a cost attached to it. And I know that it cannot be a priority of a company, especially if your company is SMEs, small, medium scale company. I really want you to go and visit what is the purpose of your company and how you fit the mission and mandate of your small, medium enterprise with the SDG goals, social development goals. I'm a co-founder of a company. It's a 21, 22 people company, and sustainability reporting is costly for us as well. I'm in the same boat as your boat, but what is the purpose of the company? How we are including diversity in our employees? Are we using minimum resources in our offices? Are we letting people, maybe if possible, work from home so they do not create more scope 3 emissions when they can afford to work from home? So these are the simple checklists, and it is not costly. And if that little checklist is in your purpose, and even if you don't measure it, but people see you are doing that, your employees see you are doing that, that is a huge message, and that is not costly.
And to add, interestingly, some of those points like working from home or having organizations, or for example, you can have zero waste supermarkets, for example. Even if the upfront cost of setting that up is expensive, what you might notice is what Puja was saying is that you have less cost being incurred as a result of making that change. You're paying less for packaging. You don't have to pay suppliers for these packaging. You don't have to import as many things. And actually what you might foresee is the cost of maybe doing these reportings, you might actually have unrecognized or unrealized benefits and profits as a result of that. So it's actually sometimes quite good to sort of dive into this a bit deeper to actually see the potential for your organization.
And I think just to finish on that, I think one thing that is interesting on this is often the argument, if you want to influence sustainable change within your organization or a supplier, often the argument is about the risk of doing nothing is more risky than the risk of doing something. So they may be making products in industries which may not have a very bright future the way the world is going. So If they don't, we all know that people have to invest to stay where they are, to stay competitive. But I showed earlier some disruptive, companies coming into the marketplace, and I showed earlier, some stats around the sort of bubbling up. It's a bubbling up of consumer, behavior in this area. You can see from all the stats that it's getting more and more and more prominent. If you're ignoring this and you've got your head stuck in the sand, do nothing, then you're in more danger than actually taking some difficult decisions and investing in whether it's small projects or a big long-term strategy. And maybe that's the argument often that works. It's a very good, hard financial argument, which maybe procurement people are quite used to doing that.
I would just say, we are living in a world where small change can lead to big gains. So, and these small changes are not costly. So see your company's operations from top to bottom and see what little change you can take easily without impacting your cost. If you will aggregate these changes here and there, sum them up, it will be a big change for the environment. And when you will report, you don't have to do something new because it is in your mission. It is in company's mandate. You're already doing. And when you are doing what you want to report, it's not costly.
And Puja, thank you. Maybe that's the final note that we bring this session to a close, because that has been fantastic. Thank you to Ed, Alina, Puja for all your time this afternoon, to everybody on the who's attended, everyone that's raised questions, comments in the chats. We will be available on our SPP UK chapter. We will keep going with some of the debate there, some of the information, and we'll post some of the links on there as well. So Seb, anything else you want to add? I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending this afternoon, and thank you again.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much again for our guests. That was amazing. We will share the recording in full afterwards, and also the slides. But thanks again, Ed, Puja, Liliana. That was brilliant. Again, a huge amount of work.
Huge content.
And a lot of content covered in a short space of time, but in a very digestible way, because I felt like I've learned quite a bit, and I've already been messaging some of my colleagues on Slack with some of the facts and figures that you shared today. So thank you so much.
It's brilliant.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, honestly.
Thanks, everybody.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you too.
Brilliant.
And we're here again.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.